My name is Leo and I'm 29. Last week at a family meeting staged to humiliate me, my parents called me a poor disappointment right to my face. They demanded I hand over the only inheritance I'd ever received. But they didn't know that in a few minutes my private helicopter was scheduled to land on their perfectly manicured lawn, an arrival designed to shatter every lie they had ever told about me. If you're watching this from somewhere where you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. And before I tell you about the confrontation that changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about finding your own worth when the people who are supposed to love you most just can't see it. Before my life took a sharp 90-degree turn, I was a ghost in my own family, a quiet footnote in a story that was never about me. On the surface, we were the American dream personified. My father, Richard, is a high-powered corporate attorney, a man who wears his success like a tailored suit. My mother, Eleanor, is the perfect corporate wife, her life, a curated whirlwind of charity boards, garden clubs, and maintaining our family's pristine image at the country club. And then there's my younger brother, Chad. Chad is the sun around which our entire family universe orbits. He was the high school football captain, the fraternity president, the graduate of a prestigious business school. Now he plays the part of a flashy stockbroker, complete with a leased German sports car and a rented penthouse apartment he can't actually afford. He is in every sense of the term the golden child. And me, I was the anomaly, the quiet variable in their perfect equation. I was never interested in sports or social climbing. My sanctuary was the basement, a cool, quiet space that smelled of concrete and ozone. They're surrounded by discarded furniture and boxes of holiday decorations. I found my refuge in the clean logic and infinite creativity of code. As a teenager, while Chad was out collecting trophies and party invitations, I was collecting programming languages. I taught myself C++, Python, and Java, building worlds from scratch on a flickering monitor. My parents viewed my passion as a strange, slightly embarrassing phase, something they hoped I'd grow out of. They saw a son who preferred the company of a command line to a conversation, and they didn't know what to do with me. The financial disparity in their support was a canyon between Chad and me. When Chad decided he wanted to start a luxury lifestyle brand at 22, they wrote him a check for $50,000 without a second thought. The venture failed spectacularly within 6 months, the money vanishing into a series of lavish launch parties and poorly designed merchandise. They simply called it a learning experience. Meanwhile, when my only laptop, my lifeline to the world I was building, died during my senior year of high school, I had to work 20 hours a week bagging groceries to buy a new one myself. "You need to learn the value of $1, Leo," my father had said, placing a condescending hand on my shoulder, completely oblivious to the irony. This injustice has been a low, constant hum throughout my life, a background radiation of being less than. I remember my 16th birthday. Chad, who had turned 16 the year before, was given a brand new convertible. For my 16th birthday, I received a savings bond that would mature in 10 years and a lecture on fiscal responsibility. I remember my college graduation with painful clarity. I graduated top of my department in computer science, summa cum laude. Chad graduated the same year with a thoroughly average business degree and a C+ average. My parents threw a massive graduation party at the country club. Every banner, every custom-printed napkin read, "Congratulations, Chad." When I gently reminded my mother that I had also, in fact, graduated with high honors, she just waved her hand dismissively, a gesture I knew all too well. "Oh, Leo, don't be so sensitive. It's a party for both of you." Everyone knows how hard Chad worked to get through his classes. That night, I sat in my room staring at my summa cum laude diploma and felt absolutely nothing. It was just a piece of paper, unrecognized by the people whose recognition I craved most. My accomplishments were invisible to them. The only person in my family who ever truly saw me, who looked past the quiet exterior and saw the fire inside, was Grandma Margaret. She was a retired school teacher, a wise and gentle woman with eyes that missed nothing. She recognized the restless curiosity in me from a young age. While my parents saw a strange obsession, she saw a gift. She bought me my first book on programming and would sit for hours in my basement sanctuary, a cup of tea in her hands, listening patiently as I excitedly explained complex algorithms even when she didn't understand a word. "You have a special mind, Leo," she'd often say, her voice warm with genuine admiration. "Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for being different." She was my anchor in a family that often made me feel adrift. After college, I landed a coveted job at a Silicon Valley tech giant. For my family, it was the first time I'd done something respectable, something they could brag about at dinner parties. "Our Leo is a software engineer at Omnitech," my mother would announce. But I hated it. I hated the soul-crushing corporate culture, the pointless meetings, the feeling of being a tiny cog in a giant impersonal machine. So after 2 years of saving every penny I did, the unthinkable, I quit. I cashed out my stock options and decided to go all in on my own idea, a social networking app I called ConnectSphere, designed to foster meaningful local community connections in an increasingly isolated digital world. My family reacted as if I'd just announced I was joining a cult. "You're throwing your entire future away," my father roared over the phone, his voice shaking with rage. "For some stupid idea," Chad just laughed. "Good luck living in mom and dad's basement when you're 30, bro." They couldn't understand that for me, success wasn't a fancy job title or a 6-figure salary. It was about creation. It was about solving a problem. It was about building something that mattered. So I retreated into my own world. I moved into a small, unassuming one-bedroom apartment and got to work. For the next 5 years, my life was a cycle of coding, debugging, and bootstrapping. I became an expert at living on a shoestring budget. To my family, this was the ultimate proof of my failure. They saw a man approaching 30 living like a destitute college student, and they were mortified. They didn't see the 18-hour days, the relentless dedication, or the quiet thrill as ConnectSphere slowly started to gain traction. They only saw the surface, and my surface screamed poor. I thought I could live with this arrangement forever, living a double life, the failure Leo my family saw and the driven CEO of a growing startup. I thought I could endure their pity and their backhanded comments. But I had no idea that an impending tragedy would shatter this fragile balance, forcing every secret I held into the harsh, unforgiving light. The catalyst, as it so often does in life, arrived cloaked in grief. 6 weeks ago, Grandma Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89. Her death left a gaping hole in my heart and in the very fabric of my world. She was my champion, my confidant, my voice of reason in a family that so often lacked it. The funeral was a heavy, somber affair held on a gray, drizzly afternoon that perfectly matched the mood. I delivered the eulogy, my voice cracking as I shared memories of her boundless kindness, her sharp wit, and her unwavering belief in me. Throughout the service, I couldn't help but notice my parents and Chad huddled together in a pew, whispering urgently. Their glances kept flickering towards me, but their expressions held something other than grief. It was an unnerving mixture of calculation and impatience. At the time, I was too lost in my own sorrow to properly analyze it, dismissing it as their awkward way of handling the solemnity of the occasion. I should have known better. 2 weeks later, her lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Hemlock, summoned us to his wood-paneled office for the reading of the will. The air in the room was thick with expectation. My mother and father sat rigidly in their chairs while Chad fidgeted, unable to conceal his anticipation. The will was a simple document, a reflection of my grandmother's practical nature. She left her small book-filled house to a local literacy charity she had volunteered with for 30 years. Her collection of antique jewelry and furniture was to be divided equally between my mother and my aunt. And then there was one final provision. To my beloved grandson, Leo Anderson, Mr. Hemlock read, his voice clear and steady, whose quiet, loyalty, brilliant mind, and good heart have always been a source of great pride and comfort to me. I leave the entirety of my remaining life savings with the hope that it helps him pursue his dreams, whatever they may be. He looked up over his spectacles. The amount is $50,000. For me, the number was secondary. It was the words brilliant mind, good heart, great pride. It was the final validation from the one person who truly got me. It was her nod from beyond the grave, a final loving whisper of "I believe in you." Tears welled in my eyes, and I silently thanked her, a wave of profound gratitude washing over my grief. But as I looked around the room, my family's reaction was starkly different. My mother's face, which had been composed now, looked personally offended, as if my grandmother had slighted her directly. My father's brow furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line of disapproval. And Chad, his face was a mask of disbelief and raw, unfiltered indignation. 50 grand, he blurted out, his voice dripping with scorn. That's it. After all the time we spent with her, an intensely awkward silence fell over the room. Chad seemed to realize his outburst was inappropriate, but not because it was disrespectful, because it revealed his true motivations. Mr. Hemlock cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and formally concluded the meeting. On the way out to the parking lot, my father placed a heavy proprietary hand on my shoulder. "Leo, we need to talk about this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. This Sunday night, at the house, a family meeting. The phrase "family meeting in our house" was always a euphemism for a confrontation, an intervention. It was where decisions were made, or rather handed down from on high. I felt a familiar cold dread wash over me. I knew this inheritance wasn't seen as a gift to me. It was seen as a family asset, a resource to be reallocated according to their priorities. Their initial reaction had planted a seed of anxiety in my gut. Over the next few days, as the meeting loomed, that seed sprouted into a thicket of dread. My mother called her voice artificially sweet and cloying. "Leo, dear, you know Chad is going through such a tough spell with his firm. He's working so hard, but the market is just brutal. A little liquid capital could really make all the difference for him." Chad then followed up with a barrage of texts, each one a masterclass in condescension. "Hey, bro, 50 kelvins isn't a lot in the real world. You should really invest it wisely instead of letting it sit in a bank. Maybe in something stable, like my company. Win-win." Every call, every text felt like a probing needle testing my defenses, trying to find a weak spot. They were setting the stage for Sunday night, and I had the sinking feeling I was being cast in the role of the fool. They still saw me as the failed son, the eccentric hermit who wouldn't have the first clue what to do with a sudden windfall. They knew nothing of the last 8 months of my life, of the secret meetings, the tense negotiations with Titan Corp, and the final life-altering number that had redefined my existence. They were preparing for an ambush, completely unaware that they were marching into a trap of their own making. The storm had a time and a place, and I knew that on Sunday night it would finally break. The days leading up to the Sunday family meeting felt like living in the eerie, pressurized calm before a hurricane. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken demands. The campaign to separate me from my inheritance escalated with a swiftness and ruthlessness that was in its own way impressive. Each move was a calculated play, peeling back another layer of my family's dysfunction and revealing the transactional nature of their affection. The first full-scale assault happened on Wednesday. My mother called, her voice dripping with the kind of manufactured concern she deployed when she wanted something. "Leo, darling, I just got off the phone with Chad. He sounds so tired. He's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, trying to keep his employees paid, trying to build something for our family's name. I just worry he's going to make himself sick with stress." She paused dramatically, leaving a pocket of silence for me to fill with an offer of help. When I offered only a simple, non-committal, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," her tone sharpened in patience, bleeding through the velvet glove. "You know, Leo, a little financial support could ease that burden immensely. It would be a gesture of solidarity. Grandma Margaret always said family comes first. She would have certainly wanted to help her grandson secure his future." The way she invoked my grandmother's name, twisting her memory into a tool for emotional blackmail, made my stomach clench. It was a low blow even for her. I mumbled something about needing to think about my own finances and quickly ended the call, the ghost of my grandmother's real intentions screaming in my mind. The second incident was far more brazen. Chad himself showed up at my apartment on Thursday evening unannounced. He was dressed in one of his $1,000 suits, though it looked slightly rumpled, and the usual smug grin was replaced with a forced, serious expression he probably practiced in the mirror. "Hey man," he said, pushing past me into my small living room. He scanned the modest space, the secondhand sofa, the stacks of programming books, the simple IKEA furniture with a look of undisguised pity. "Look, we need to have a real talk, brother to brother." He sat on my only sofa, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, as if he were closing a major deal. He launched into a pitch filled with business jargon, market volatility, unreliable investors leveraging assets, a golden opportunity that was just one small investment away. It was a performance, and I was his captive audience. $50,000, he said, finally, looking me dead in the eye. "To you, it's a lucky break, a lottery ticket. To me, it's rocket fuel. It's the difference between cruising and taking off into the stratosphere. You give it to me, I'll turn it into $500,000 inside a year. I'll give you your money back doubled. It's a promise." His audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't asking, he was telling. He was selling me a dream with my own money and expecting me to thank him for the privilege. He saw my inheritance not as mine, but as a misplaced resource that his superior intellect could put to better use. I held his gaze and kept my voice neutral. "That's a big offer, Chad. It's a lot to consider. I need time to think." He clicked, his tongue annoyance flashing across his face. "Don't think too long, Leo. Opportunity doesn't wait for guys like you." He left, leaving a greasy film of entitlement and condescension in the air. But the third and final escalation, the one that solidified my resolve, came from my father. He didn't call or visit. He was above such direct tactics. He sent an email on Friday morning. The subject line read simply, "Family obligation and fiscal responsibility." The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation, written in the cold, formal legalese he favored. He wrote about the implicit fiduciary duty of the more fortunate members of a family unit to uplift those who are actively building the family's legacy. He framed Chad's high-risk, debt-fueled lifestyle as building a legacy, while my years of disciplined, solitary work were implicitly framed as a drain. He suggested that Chad's success was the family's success, and therefore supporting him was a prudent investment in the Anderson family brand. But it was the final paragraph that was the real gut punch, a perfectly crafted insult designed to undermine my intelligence and my adulthood. "Leo, sometimes the most effective way for a person without significant financial experience or real-world business acumen to contribute is to trust the judgment of those who possess it. Do not let stubbornness or emotional attachment to a small sum cloud the correct logical decision. This is a chance for you to be a team player." He wasn't just calling me poor. He was calling me an incompetent, emotional idiot. He was stripping me of my agency, reducing me to a child who needed his allowance managed by the grown-ups. The quiet anger that had been simmering inside me for days began to boil over into a cold, hard rage. I had been trying to handle this diplomatically. I had planned to go to the meeting, listen patiently, and gently decline. But my father's email changed everything. This was no longer a request. It was a demand for submission, an attack on my very identity. In a moment of pure frustration, I called the one person on earth who knew the truth of my situation, David Chen, my mentor and now my business partner. David was a legendary venture capitalist who had seen the potential in ConnectSphere when it was little more than a concept and a few thousand lines of code. He was the one who had guided me through the acquisition by Titan Corp. I read him my father's email aloud. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Wow," David said finally. "They really have no idea, do they? They still think you're a broke coder living in a shoebox." "That's the gist of it," I replied, my voice tight. David was quiet for another moment. Then he said, his voice firm but kind, "Leo, you've let them treat you this way for far too long. You've been trying to keep the peace, but peace can't exist when only one side is trying. They don't respect you. They don't respect your work. They don't respect your intelligence. Maybe it's time you showed them exactly who they're talking to. His words were like a mirror reflecting a truth I had been avoiding for years. My feelings were valid. This situation was profoundly unhealthy, and my passive acceptance had only enabled it. He was right. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, my voice raw. "Go to that meeting," David said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "Don't fight them. Don't argue. Let them say everything they need to say. Let them put all their condescending, manipulative cards on the table. And when they're done, you call for your ride." The plan began to form in my mind, audacious, theatrical, and perfectly tailored to the audience. This wasn't just about saying no anymore. This was about shattering the false narrative they had built around me, brick by painful brick. It was about reclaiming my own story. Their escalation, their blatant disrespect had inadvertently given me a priceless gift: clarity. I no longer felt guilty or hesitant. I felt a cold, calm resolve. They wanted a family meeting, fine. I would give them a family meeting they would never, ever forget. I spent the rest of Friday making a few crucial phone calls, not just preparing mentally, but logistically. I knew that after Sunday night there would be no going back. And for the first time in my life, that felt like the ultimate freedom. Sunday evening arrived with a sense of unavoidable gravity. I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic to my childhood home, a sprawling colonial mansion in a wealthy suburb. The house itself was a perfect metaphor for my family, beautiful on the outside, impeccably maintained, but cold and formal within. As I walked through the heavy oak door, they were already there, assembled in the formal living room, a space reserved for guests and confrontations, a room that smelled of lemon polish and unspoken resentment. My father sat in his favorite high-backed leather armchair, a king surveying his court. My mother was perched rigidly on the edge of the silk sofa, her posture ramrod straight. And Chad was pacing in front of the unlit fireplace, affecting an air of importance that was both comical and infuriating. The scene was set. The tribunal was in session. "Leo, glad you could make it," my father said, his voice devoid of any real warmth. It was the tone he used on junior associates who were 5 minutes late. "Sit down. We have important matters to discuss." I took a seat in a stiff, uncomfortable chair opposite them, feeling the familiar weight of their collective disapproval settle over me. There was no small talk, no pretense of a social visit. They cut straight to the chase. "As you know," my father began, steepling his fingers, "Chad is at a pivotal moment in his career. He's building an empire, Leo. An empire. But even the greatest empires need a solid foundation, a strong financial footing. Grandma Margaret's inheritance, however modest, has come at a providential time. It's a sign." My mother interjected, her voice taking on a pious tone. "Grandma always adored Chad. She saw his potential. She would surely want to see that money used to secure his future, to build something lasting for the Anderson family name." I remained silent, letting them weave their narrative. I wanted to hear all of it. I needed to hear it. Chad stopped his pacing and finally turned to face me directly, his expression a carefully rehearsed mask of brotherly concern. "Look, Leo, I'll be blunt. I need that $50,000. Not want, need. The market's a killer right now. I have to make a few strategic moves to stay ahead of the curve. This cash infusion allows me to do that. It's a game changer." "And what specifically is your plan for it?" I asked, keeping my voice level, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "That's business, Leo. A little complex for you, no offense," Chad replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It involves options trading, leveraged positions. Things you wouldn't understand. Just know that it'll be put to good use. The best use. You see, Leo," my father continued, leaning forward as if explaining a simple concept to a child, "this is a win-win for the family. You make a small contribution, you help your brother, and when he succeeds, and he will succeed, we all benefit. The family's reputation is enhanced. It's a synergistic investment." I took a deep, steadying breath. I appreciate the input from all of you. I began choosing my words carefully. I really do. But I have my own plans for that money. It was a personal gift from Grandma, and I intend to honor her specific wish that I use it to pursue my own dreams. The atmosphere in the room, already cool, dropped to freezing. The masks of civility fell away. Dreams, Chad barked out a harsh, incredulous laugh. It was a sound filled with years of sibling rivalry and genuine contempt. What dreams, Leo, to keep living in that dump of an apartment and playing on your computer all day? You're almost 30 years old. It's time to grow up and face reality. Your dream is a dead end. That was the last straw. Chad's words were the spark, but it was my parents' silent, nodding agreement that was the explosion. They didn't reprimand him. They didn't defend me. Their silence was a verdict. They agreed with every single venomous word. Chad has a point, Leo, my father said, his voice now as cold and hard as steel. We have been patient with you. We have tolerated this extended adolescence, this little computer project of yours, hoping that you would eventually make something of your life. But you haven't. You can barely make ends meet. You drive a car that's a rolling embarrassment. You have absolutely nothing to show for the years you've wasted. He stood up and took a step towards me, his face flushing a deep, angry red. And now, when you have a chance to do one single, meaningful thing to contribute to your family, to help your brother who is actually out there fighting in the real world, you're going to throw it away for some selfish, imaginary dream. You are a profound disappointment. And then my mother delivered the final, fatal blow. Her words weren't yelled. They were spoken with a quiet, chilling disdain that hurt more than any physical strike ever could. She looked not at me, but at my father, as if I were no longer in the room. We've tried, Richard, but you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. He's content with being poor. Poor. The word hung in the air, toxic and final. In that one moment, my entire world narrowed to that single, crushing syllable. All my years of silent, grinding work, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, my quiet, monumental achievements, all of it was erased and replaced by their verdict. They didn't see me. They had never seen me. They only saw a caricature they had created to make their own choices seem superior. Leo, the poor failure. In that moment, a strange and total calm washed over me. The anger vanished. The hurt receded. All that remained was a perfect crystalline clarity. David was right. I had let them treat me this way for far too long. It was time to show them who they were really talking to. I looked my father dead in the eye and said softly, my voice devoid of all emotion, "Are you finished?" My calm seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst could have. They had been prepared for an argument, for tears, for a desperate defense, or for a sullen capitulation. They were not prepared for this quiet, unnerving authority. "Are you finished?" I repeated, my voice still even and low. My father, momentarily thrown off his rhythm, just gave a curt, stiff nod, sinking back into his chair. "Good," I said, my gaze sweeping across the three of them. "Then, it's my turn." I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I remained seated, a calm center in the storm they had created. My secret weapon wasn't a document I could slap on the table or a recording I could play. My secret weapon was the truth. The complete, unvarnished truth of the last 5 years of my life. A truth I had shielded from them, not out of shame, but to protect it from the acid of their judgment and the poison of their scorn. You're right about one thing I began, and I saw a fleeting, triumphant smirk on Chad's face. I have lived frugally. I didn't buy fancy cars or expensive clothes or lavish vacations. I didn't do those things because every dollar I made, every ounce of creative energy I possessed, was poured into one single-minded obsession: my company, ConnectSphere. "Oh, the app again," Chad scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Don't tell me your dream is to finally get it into the App Store. How much has that made you, Leo? Enough for this month's rent, and a pizza." I let his jibe hang in the air and then die, turning my attention back to my parents, the real audience. For 3 years, I built it from the ground up by myself in a tiny apartment you all disdained. I worked 18-hour days. When I wasn't coding, I was teaching myself marketing, corporate finance, venture capital, and contract law from books and online courses. I failed 100 times, learned from each failure, and rebuilt it stronger. 2 years ago, the app started to get users. Not a few, but thousands. A year ago, it hit 1 million active users. 9 months ago, while you were all at the club brunch, I got a call. I paused, letting the silence in the room deepen. I had their complete, unwilling attention. It was a call from the vice president of acquisitions at Titan Corp. Even Chad in his self-absorbed world knew that name. Titan Corp was a global behemoth, one of the 5 largest tech companies on the planet. The smug look on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The silence in the room became heavy-charged with unspoken questions. They had been tracking ConnectSphere's growth for months. I continued my voice, a calm, steady narrative. They saw its potential. They wanted to acquire it. The negotiations took 3 intense months. They were the most difficult and stressful months of my entire life. I was working with teams of lawyers from one of the top firms in the country. I was in boardrooms with financial analysts who dissected every line of my code and every aspect of my business model. I flew back and forth to California so many times I lost count. And I was under a rock-solid, ironclad non-disclosure agreement, which is why none of you knew anything. Acquired, my mother finally said the word, coming out as a hesitant whisper. Her mind was clearly struggling to reconcile the son she thought she knew with the person I was describing. What does that mean, Leo? Did they give you a job? Did they pay you for your work? A few $1,000s, perhaps. Enough for a fresh start. Her questions revealed the absolute smallness of her imagination when it came to me. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt not anger, but a profound aching sadness for her inability to see beyond the surface. An acquisition of this nature is not about a job, Mom, I explained patiently. It's the sale of an entire company. Titan Corp bought ConnectSphere and all of its intellectual property. They bought my dream. So what was the price? My father interjected, his lawyer's mind cutting through the fog. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. What was the number, Leo? I held his gaze. I let the moment hang in the air, a pendulum swinging between their world and mine. The final purchase price, I said, enunciating each word with perfect clarity, was $95 million. A profound, absolute, deafening silence fell upon the room. It was as if the sound itself had been sucked into a black hole. Chad's face was frozen in an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, his jaw literally hanging open. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was slowly morphing into disbelief. My father, the man who was never at a loss for words, the man who commanded boardrooms, looked completely and utterly speechless, as if he'd been struck by lightning. 95 million, my father stammered the words, catching in his throat a broken, strangled sound. After capital gains, taxes, legal fees, and agent commissions, my net proceeds were approximately $62 million, I said, matter-of-factly, as if I were discussing a grocery bill. I've since established a holding company, Anderson Innovations, to manage the assets. The funds are invested in a diversified portfolio of real estate equities and private ventures. And of course, I've endowed a charitable foundation in Grandma Margaret's name. I let the information wash over them, a tidal wave of truth that was drowning their carefully constructed reality. I could practically see the gears grinding in their heads as they tried and failed to process it. I am not poor, Mom, I said gently, my voice soft but firm. I've been a multimillionaire for the past 8 months. I just have different priorities than you. I don't need to display my wealth to feel my worth. I turned my gaze to Chad, who looked like he was going to be physically ill. And so, Chad, the answer is no. I will not be giving you Grandma's $50,000 inheritance. Not because I don't have the money, but because you don't deserve it. You didn't earn it, and you don't respect it. And most of all, I will not throw good money after bad to bail out a business built on arrogance and incompetence. Finally, I turned back to my father. You called me a disappointment. The truth is, I stopped seeking your approval years ago. I had to for my own survival. I learned that my value isn't determined by your opinion of me, but by my own actions, my own integrity, and my own creations. I stood up and the simple motion felt momentous. They were trapped in their shock while I was finally free. The plan was in motion. The truth was out. But there was one final spectacular act to come. I pulled out my phone. And now, if you'll all excuse me, I have an appointment to keep. I dialed a single number from my favorites list. Michael, I said into the phone, my voice calm. It's me. It's done. You can come get me. Yes, the usual spot. See you in 10 minutes. I hung up and looked at my stunned family. What appointment, my mother finally managed to gasp. Where are you going at this hour? Home, I replied simply. And my ride is on its way. I walked over to the large picture window that overlooked the sprawling, immaculate back lawn where Chad and I used to play as kids. I didn't look at them. I just looked out into the darkness, and I waited. I knew that what was about to happen would be seared into their minds forever, an indelible, roaring image of the son they had never ever bothered to know. The next 10 minutes were the longest and most surreal 10 minutes of my family's collective existence. No one said a word. The air in the room was thick with shattered pride and unspoken questions. My father had slumped back into his leather throne, his face ashen, looking as if he had aged a decade in the last 5 minutes. My mother kept looking from me to her husband, and back again, her eyes wide with a dawning bewilderment. Chad had collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands, his entire posture one of utter defeat. I simply stood by the window, feeling a preternatural calm, my reflection, a ghostly silhouette against the gathering dark of the back lawn. And then it began. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a low rhythmic vibration more felt than heard, like a distant train. But it grew steadily louder, a deep percussive beat that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity. Thump, thump, thump. What is that sound? My mother asked, her voice a nervous whisper breaking the spell of silence. I didn't answer. I just allowed myself a small, private smile, keeping my eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and now it was accompanied by a rising wind that rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree in the yard. The delicate china on the end table next to my mother began to vibrate, a faint clinking sound against the growing roar. Thump, 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 thump. The sound was immense now, a pulsing, guttural roar that seemed to drown out all thought, a sound that did not belong in this quiet, orderly suburb. Chad lifted his head, a look of genuine confusion and alarm on his face. What the hell is that? Just then, 2 powerful beams of light sliced through the darkness, flooding the back lawn and pouring into the living room, bathing us all in a brilliant, sterile white light. We all squinted, momentarily blinded. They were like the eyes of some giant, mythical beast descending from the sky. You should go outside and see, I said, my voice clear and calm, yet just loud enough to be heard over the noise. They hesitated for a moment, torn between fear and a desperate curiosity. My father, ever the patriarch who needed to be in control, was the first to move. He walked stiffly, almost mechanically, to the sliding glass door that led to the back patio. My mother and Chad followed a few steps behind, like moths drawn to a strange, terrifying, and incomprehensible flame. When my father slid the door open, a powerful gust of wind ripped through the room, sending magazines and decorative napkins flying off the coffee table. The noise was deafening, a physical force that battered our senses. They stepped out onto the stone patio, and I followed, stepping out into the whirlwind. Hovering above us, suspended 20 feet over the center of the lawn, was a sleek black Sikorsky S-76 helicopter. Its powerful landing lights illuminated the entire garden in an ethereal, almost alien glow. The downdraft from its massive rotors flattened my mother's meticulously cared-for rose bushes and created a chaotic vortex of leaves, grass, clippings, and displaced mulch. It was a sight both magnificent and violent, a raw, unapologetic intrusion of power and wealth into their quiet, insulated world. My family stood there, frozen their heads, craned back, staring up at the roaring machine above them. Their faces lit from below by the patio lights, and from above by the helicopter's beams were comical masks of awe, fear, and utter slack-jawed incomprehension. The cabin door of the helicopter slid open with a smooth hydraulic hiss, and a man in a pilot's uniform and noise-canceling headphones leaned out. He spotted me, smiled, and gave me a crisp thumbs up. I turned to my family. I had to yell to be heard over the incredible noise. My ride is here. My father turned to look at me, his mouth agape. He pointed a trembling, unsteady finger at the helicopter, then back at me. No words came out. He was completely short-circuited. "Is that how you got here?" "Leo," my mother screamed, her voice thin and reedy against the roar. "You came in that thing, no!" I yelled back, a grin finally breaking across my face. "I usually use it for work and the occasional errand, but tonight it's taking me home." The helicopter began to slowly, gracefully descend its skids, touching down with impossible gentleness on the very center of my father's prized, perfect lawn. As the engines began to power down, the deafening roar subsided into the high-pitched, whining whir of the slowly spinning blades. The pilot, Michael, a calm professional I trusted, implicitly hopped out of the cockpit. He took off his headset, the sudden relative, quiet feeling strange. He smiled at me. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson." All set, Michael. Thanks for coming on a Sunday," I said, my voice returning to a normal volume. I turned to face my family one last time. They were still in a state of catatonic shock. The spectacle was simply too much for their minds to process. Their son, the failure, the poor one, the awkward outsider they had just finished verbally eviscerating 15 minutes ago, was now standing next to his private helicopter, which was currently parked on their lawn. How is this possible?" Chad finally choked out his voice, a ragged whisper, the fight completely gone from him. "While you were busy trying to impress people with rented suits and leased cars," I said, my voice now cold, clinical, and precise. "I was in the basement, actually building something of value. That's the difference between us, Chad. You play at being rich. I won the game." I looked at my parents, who both looked pale and frail under the harsh lights. "This is the last time you will call me poor. This is the last time you will call me a disappointment. From this day forward, our relationship, if it is to exist at all, will be on my terms. You will treat me with respect. You will treat my life and my choices with respect. The condescension ends tonight." I turned without another word and walked towards the waiting helicopter. "Leo, wait!" My mother cried out, her voice suddenly frantic, desperate. "Don't go like this. We need to talk." "We made a mistake." I stopped at the cabin door, but I didn't turn around. "We're done talking, Mom. You said everything you needed to say. You made it very clear how you feel about me. And now, so have I. But the money," my father stammered, his lawyer's brain finally rebooting, trying to grasp the scale of his miscalculation. "Why didn't you tell us we're your family?" I turned back to look at him then, and I let all the years of hurt, all the frustration, all the quiet loneliness show in my eyes. "Because, Dad," I said, and my voice was quiet but carried across the lawn with devastating weight, "I wanted a family who would love me for who I was, not for my bank balance. And tonight, you all proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I don't have that here." I stepped up into the luxurious, leather-appointed cabin of the helicopter. Michael closed the door behind me, sealing me off from them. As we lifted off, rising smoothly into the night sky, I looked down one last time. 3 small, isolated figures stood on the lawn, dwarfed by the scale of what had just happened. They were looking up, their faces lost to the shadows, but I could imagine their expressions: shock, regret, and the slow, painful dawning horror of their monumental, irreversible mistake. The showdown was over, and I had won. As the helicopter climbed higher, the engine's roar was all-encompassing, but inside the soundproofed cabin, a profound silence had settled in my soul. It felt like the end of a war that had been waged inside me for my entire life. The lights of my childhood home, the gilded cage where I was never enough, shrank below. It became just another pinprick in a vast sea of suburban lights, and then as we turned towards the coast, it vanished completely. Michael, the pilot, ever the professional, passed me a bottle of chilled water through the intercom. "Everything okay back there, mister?" "Anderson, better than okay, Michael," I replied, and I was surprised by the depth of truth in those words. "For the first time in a very long time, everything is perfectly okay." The flight to my home was only 20 minutes, but it felt like a journey to another dimension, a passage from one life to the next. We soared over the familiar grid of neighborhoods, over the glittering electric spine of the downtown skyline, and out towards the coast where the city met the dark, vast expanse of the ocean. The feeling of freedom was overwhelming, almost dizzying. The immense weight of my family's expectations, their judgments, their constant simmering disappointment, the invisible burden I had carried on my shoulders for 29 years, seemed to have been released into the thin air, dissipating into the night sky behind us. We landed on a private helipad atop a sleek residential skyscraper on the waterfront. A building so modern and anonymous, it was the architectural opposite of my parents' colonial mansion. From the helipad, a private elevator keyed to my biometrics took me directly down into my penthouse apartment, my real home, my sanctuary. It wasn't a space designed to impress others, it was designed for me. It was minimalist with clean lines, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a breathtaking 180-degree view of the city and the bay. It was filled not with expensive trinkets, but with things I loved, shelves overflowing with books on physics and philosophy, state-of-the-art technology, and a few carefully chosen pieces of contemporary art. It was my space, built by my success, a fortress of solitude whose existence no one in my family had ever even suspected. That night I did nothing productive. I didn't check my email. I didn't work on my next project. I just sat on my expansive balcony, a glass of expensive single malt whiskey in my hand. A luxury I could now afford but rarely indulged in, and watched the city breathe before me. The quiet was magnificent. It was a quiet, free of manipulative phone calls, condescending text messages, and the constant nagging feeling that I had to justify my own existence. Meanwhile, I could only imagine the pandemonium I had left in my wake. I pictured the frantic, circular conversation happening in that formal living room, the disbelief giving way to accusations, the frantic Googling of my name of Connext's fear of Titan Corp acquisition, and then the slow, agonizing realization of the scale of their miscalculation. They had bet everything on their golden child, a hollow facade of success, while actively scorning the son who had quietly built an empire in a basement. I knew with absolute certainty that no one in that house would be sleeping that night. Their pride was shattered, their worldview had been turned completely upside down. They had lost not only access to unimaginable wealth, but more importantly, they had lost their son, perhaps for good. The next morning, I woke up to the sunrise over the bay, feeling lighter than I had in years. I went for a long run along the waterfront, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from something, but towards a future that was finally completely my own. The fallout from my family came faster and more furiously than I could have imagined. By noon, my phone's call log was a testament to their panic. There were 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 from my father, and a staggering 25 text messages from Chad, each one a step further down the ladder of desperation. They cycled through the stages of grief and regret, right there in my message history. It began with outrage. "How dare you humiliate us like that? This is not who we raised you to be," which quickly morphed into disbelief. "Leo, this has to be some kind of sick joke. Call me. We need to understand." And finally, it descended into pathetic, transparent begging. "Leo, please, call me back. I'm sorry. I was an idiot. We all were. We made a terrible mistake. We can fix this. I didn't answer a single call or reply to a single text. Not yet. It was too soon. They needed to sit in the uncomfortable silence. They needed to marinate in the consequences of their own words and actions. My new dawn had begun, and it was built on a new, unshakable foundation, self-respect. And anyone who wanted to be a part of my life from now on would have to learn how to walk on it.